Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon if you're joining internationally from Europe. Welcome to the webinar presented by ICLEAR and supported by us here at CriticalArc, Navigating Campus Controversy, Challenges of Managing Protests and Critical Events. I'm Glenn Farrant. I'm the CEO and co-founder of CriticalArc, and we deliver the Safe Zone solution to allow organisations to manage safety, security and emergencies throughout their campuses locally and internationally. This particular topic is obviously very prescient. It is a challenge that most organisations are either actively dealing with, have dealt with, or are preparing to deal with. So it is a very appropriate discussion to have today. And we have an esteemed panel with us today to discuss this and share their wisdom. To start with, we have Director of Public Safety from Oberlin, Tyrone Wicks. Thanks for joining, Tyrone. We have Dr. Jack Moorman. I think most of us in the ICLEAR family know Jack very well. Obviously, multiple-time Chief of Police and previous leader of ICLEAR Southeast. We have President of ICLEAR and Chief of Police at University of New Hampshire, Paul Dean. Thank you for joining, Paul. And VP of Campus Safety, Rodney Chapman from Brown. So thanks for joining, Rodney. Appreciate everyone's time, and we'll get into it. So campus protest has been a factor for a very long time. And I guess one way of thinking about it is that campus protest and the ability for students and academics to protest and the propensity to is almost a feature of an open environment that we have for sharing ideas and communicating on campuses. It is an international phenomenon. It's not just something that is confined here to the US. And so as we talk about this will be relevant to anyone who might have some responsibility for campus safety and coordination wherever they are, for whatever size organization they have. So we'll be running through a range of questions, and this will be an open discussion. The agenda here is a Q&A for the panel as we have everyone sitting around here, and then we have the opportunity for questions. So please ask questions through the chat mechanism and the question mechanism via Zoom, and we'll cover those towards the end. So to start off with, campus protests and any kind of unrest on campus is inherently unpredictable. It has a lot of factors that are very, very difficult to prepare for, but we obviously need to prepare for it. So maybe to start with a question for Paul, and we'll go around the room here as well, is how do you prepare for the unknown and this unpredictable nature of these types of events?
Thank you, Glenn. We're dealing with a different kind of protest today, one that is multifaceted, well-funded, and it's been difficult to manage that because issues around permitting. I'll just speak to my institution. Issues around permitting, putting things down that are not going to happen and has a different agenda to it. It used to be that you would work with groups and there would be an open line of communication about what's going to go on and take place, and it would be done together. Now it's a different kind of protest. So having that all has its plan, and taking that all has its plan and dusting it off and take a look at it with a new lens of today is critical.
Absolutely. And we'll go around the room on this one because this one's a particularly deep question. So Tyrone, from your perspective at Oberlin, how do you prepare and think about these types of events?
I think it's pretty much the same as Paul, except we really spend a lot of time scanning the social media that we know that students use. And that's really how they communicate mostly. And so in that way, we've been able to forecast a lot. I know at one point they did catch us a little bit off guard, but for the most part, we've been able to keep track of what they were going to do and where they were going to do it. And I think thinking back on your experience about how students react to things will help you forecast whether they might do exactly what they say on their social media, or whether maybe they've got a different agenda that they might work on. So you might want to make your plan a multifaceted plan. If they do this, we're going to do that. If they do this, we're going to do that. And then it's a lot of collecting a lot of intelligence from. We have our open expression observer team that goes out and just kind of gives us an idea of what direction they're going, what we're going to be doing. And so that's what we prepare for.
So in essence, you've got the structure in place, the communication capability, and then to be able to adapt, right? Is that
be able to adapt? Yes, absolutely, be able to adapt, because as Paul said, you're really not sure whether they're going to do what they say they're going to do.
Right. And Rodney, over to you. At Brown, obviously an Ivy institution with the reputational aspects as well. From your perspective, how do you prepare your team and your organization for these types of events?
I certainly agree with Paul and Tyrone. What I would add in addition to that is a couple of things. I've seen, as I look at institutions around the country that have had some negative press or bad optics, and in investigating what occurred, it seems like those bad optics and negative outcomes have come when public safety is not in alignment with response expectations of the campus. And so when you have the foreknowledge that something's going to happen through the channels like Tyrone talked about, getting in line with your campus leadership on when does this become a public safety matter for us to intervene, and what does that intervention look like? I think those are key to ensuring that you're on the same page. The other piece of it too is I've been finding out as I've had JTTF meetings and meetings with all of the alphabet soup organizations and law enforcement, is they're all saying the same thing, is they really want to partner with us. Many of them have established and continue to establish strong relationships with IACLEA. And so just finding out, they just truly are positioning themselves of wanting to help us. And so not being afraid to reach out to your law enforcement partners in city, state, and federal and saying, this is what I got. How can you help me? And there's plenty of resources out there as well.
Right. Thanks, Rodney. And Jack, you have had a very long career in a range of institutions, and now have a perspective across a bunch of organizations as well. What do you see as common factors for how organizations are preparing, or suggestions for preparing?
So I think everything that's mentioned really covered certainly the majority of the bases. One thing I would like to add, and really take it off, adding a little bit on the previous comment, not just working with the federal agencies, but even having someone at your state level, university representative who's engaged with the Fusion Center, maybe a member of the Fusion Center or something of that nature. That was one of the things we did in North Carolina. We had a specific, we had a university investigator from one of the universities who was assigned to the Fusion Center and coordinated the flow of information across all universities in the state. Another thing that we had in North Carolina that was very beneficial, we had a mutual aid agreement between all 17 public universities in the state. So, what this helped us to do is we find these events often are very spontaneous. They can quickly overload your internal resources. If you're in a small municipality, it can overload the local resources. We had the ability to have authors from any other university in the system to come quickly and to aid our agency in the event that we needed additional manpower. Final thing I'll add is I think really having designated areas of responsibility and to know who's responsible for making those decisions related to asking the protesters to leave, to make sure they have language that is written in policy that coincides with your local jurisdiction's laws on trespassing. So in the event it's not, the decision process is already thought out. If it's your dean, if it's your provost, if it's your chancellor, who is responsible for making that determination, and then make that request. You're hereby requested to leave. If not, you will be in violation of law such and such. That's important ahead of time.
Hmm. So Jack, and basically also a question for the rest of the panel, if anyone has any specifics. It sounds like with this particular issue, there's been a lot of attention from various agencies all the way up to federal level. From your experience, and also a lot of these protests, or many of them, have been focused on campuses. So campus protest in this particular situation has been a significant factor nationally. Are you finding, or are you seeing organizations finding more support from say the federal level than in other situations, or is it something where there's a capacity issue even at the federal and state level because of the rate of these types of issues occurring?
For me, the main thing we're looking for from the federal level is not personnel as much as it is that information. Again, coordinating through the Fusion Center, getting ahead of it. Also working with your local municipality and their intelligence unit. They often are going to come across information in addition to what you're doing. So not so much personnel at the federal level as it is information.
And related to that, and Paul, I was just going to throw to you, as president of ICLEA, obviously you maintain a bunch of relationships and see a lot of engagement from a range of institutions. What's your perspective on the support available for this and how it might differ from other situations?
We at ICLEA, the team has really taken a deep dive into that relationship with our federal partners on this specific issue and others. The predominantly use the federal government at this point for access to training. There are training gaps out there when it comes to protest and the First Amendment, and how does this apply? When your campus protest goes from peaceful to not peaceful and an encampment, what do you do? And because, many of us, took action. I didn't allow my protest to set up their encampment when they tried. And, that was, that came down from the administration. And yet I'm being demonized by both sides now. It's a no-win. With that, the other part that we're seeing, and we've been working with DHS and specifically Secretary Mayorkas, is on the gap at some places across the country between the police chief and the president or executive council of their community. I think this kind of protest, if you asked me a year ago, I would say, yeah, probably sometime, but things are good, right? So this thing popped up quick on October 7th. And I don't think some of our campuses had discussions prior to that. And so as these things are evolving very quickly, the police think they have a role to make sure that these things don't take up. It's going to be a public safety hazard. They're taking over public space that's open to everybody, maybe iconic spaces on your campus. And so I think that relationship, especially when you're giving instructions of what the expectation is, and then midstream that changes there. And so Secretary Mayorkas is in the process of working with us to pull together a focus group of campus law enforcement and public safety directors, and also with presidents of campuses, to have that discussion and come up with a best practice, for what you should do when it comes to this. And, not everybody has a relationship, we find out, with their president. They may report to somebody lower. So, but it's important to have that relationship with the president, much like a city or town has with the mayor of their community. It's very important to have that relationship to understand the expectations.
Right. So we'll just change the questioning a little bit and focus on what's different with this particular situation than I guess protests that might occur for other reasons. So there are a few things that are different on campuses these days with things like social media and people's exposure to issues worldwide. And then there's also the cultural factors associated with what happened on October 7 and the events that ensued and are continuing. Maybe a question for you, Tyrone, is from your perspective on campus, how has the campus environment changed as a result of October 7? The feelings of individuals on campuses, groups, the executive, and then what you might need to be prepared to deal with that whole soup of issues that could arise.
So this is, for our campus, been one of the most divisive issues we've ever had on a campus that I'm aware of. The one that's most polarizing from one student to another. So we get complaints from one group and then we get complaints from the other group, which is something that when they've had protests in the past, and Oberlin is kind of well known for protesting and activism. And so when they protested in the past, it was really an issue that a lot of the students all agreed on. And it was an outside issue, so you didn't have the kind of conflicts that we're having with students. So the cast off of that is that then we have conduct issues within our residential halls. We end up having Title IX issues. So there's definitely a cascade of other things that comes out of this particular issue as it relates to our campus. I think the real important thing for us as campus safety professionals is to make sure that, we remain absolutely neutral on the issue. And we have to, that's so important. And making sure they understand that our role, because we're there, they're students, we're not adversarial. But, and I know someone asked the question in the chat, we're not adversarial. I think I see us more as educators. When the police come in, they're going to be the police. They're going to be the police, right? And they're going to do what police are required to do. So a win for us is not having to take that role. So we try to be educators to our students about protesting, how to protest, what's illegal. They had a booklet that they got from somewhere that was like 1930 something, and they passed this on to me, and I wrote on the front of it and handed it back to him. I said, 47 ways to commit a felony. So I would just throw this away and not actually use this because this is absolutely not good for you. And so, those kinds of conversations, we'd watch videos from other schools, Columbia, and just basically say, is this where we want our campus to go? And so just kind of engaging our students in that way, reassuring the other students who might feel targeted because we have this protest on the campus, I think is one of the best ways to go.
And Glenn, I'm seeing three things. Mm-hmm. What I'm seeing is different about since October 7th is what we're experiencing now is really a zero-sum thing. It's kind of, if you're not supportive of me, you're against me. And it just really seems like it is, to Tyrone's point, so polarizing that you're on one side or the other, and there's very little middle ground. The other thing that I'm seeing as it relates to this as well is a misunderstanding, and this is faculty, staff, and students, of speech that might be awful, but it's lawful. And I call it that lawful but awful speech, and not understanding that you may disagree with something, or it may be mean-spirited, but it is still legal for them to say. And the attempt to get public safety involved in those conversations in terms of taking some action is something I'm seeing across the campus, across the country, actually. And then third, it's just these events, rightfully so, have created a significant amount of anxiety, angst, and fear from people just going about their day-to-day experience on campus, particularly in some of these spaces where this expressionistic activity is taking place.
And Rodney, do you see a lot of pressure from our donors who may have a position on each side? We hear from parents a lot saying this is unacceptable. This doesn't make the college look great. And although, you know, free speech on our campus is not about how the college feels. It's about how our students feel, right? So we can't really post that on our sign and say, this is how we feel. This is our students engaging in lawful, as Ronnie said, lawful speech, as long as they're doing it in a peaceful manner and they're not being super disruptive. On our campus, there's not a whole lot we can do about it, because it goes back to what Jack said earlier. The first question you're asking your institution is, what is your tolerance? What is your tolerance, and who makes the decision about when we pull the trigger about bringing in law enforcement?
Maybe a question back for Rodney and for the group as well is, Tyrone, you mentioned about this situation is having a cascading effect into other public safety, personal safety issues. What do you need to be prepared to do at, I guess, the personal level or anticipate at the personal level, be it a staff member, a faculty, a student who has that anxiety about being on campus or navigating this environment? Do you have to do more to anticipate this? And then also, are there any special situations where maybe there's individuals who are, I guess, on either side of this particular issue, feeling threats to their personal safety? And have you had to deal with that or account for that?
Yeah, we have, and the benefit for that is to the point that Tyrone was making, and actually what Jack mentioned as well, is in that neutral role, it is establishing, much like Jack was talking about, establishing the scripts that university personnel will have, so that they are saying in the moment, and we ranked. And I've seen the benefit of ranking expressionistic activity. So I've seen the traffic light system. This is green, this is yellow, this is red. I've seen tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and other iterations of it, but says, you know, this particular expression right now is expression that doesn't impact the flow of the ceremony. You've had your moment, and then the script is read. Okay, thank you for reading that. Thank you for sharing that. We'd like to continue, etc. Then step 2 being this expressionistic activity is behavior that kind of threatens the flow of the event. And then the third one is a expressionistic activity that either impacts personal safety or equates to the potential need of shutting down the event. But the pre-planning, pre-conversation with your university officials to the point of, this is what it's going to look like when A happens, B is going to happen, is going to be very beneficial for all of us.
And Paul, what have you seen across the industry as far as organizations reaching out to those who may not be directly involved in, say, the protest, but obviously being affected by it, and reassuring or providing services for people to get support if they feel unsafe on campus? How are organizations being proactive about, I guess, those who are on the periphery of this? Have you seen any evidence of that?
I think universities do an amazing job at providing support to the student population, whether it's through counseling, whether it's through, Tyrone said, Title IX, their conduct system, their rights, rules, and regulations. There's the support system there. You know, uniquely, this also has a large component of outside influence.
Mm.
I saw it. Sophisticated communications. They're using encrypted apps for their communication. They're using social media for their propaganda only, but they use encrypted applications, and of course, you know, they're also you know, using propaganda for things. For instance, you know, when we removed the start of the encampment, you know, we found pamphlets, small town anarchist, and in there is the playbook that's still playing out as we speak. You know, the more they can keep this in the news, this is what they want to do. And they fracture a campus. They fracture the host community of the campus. And so it ends up being that, you know, public safety or police, you know, are stuck in the middle of this regardless of how you handle it or don't handle it. You know, there's no safe way to with this as a leader. You know, you're the man in the arena. That's exactly how you are.
Right. So we're in the June time period now. Summer has started. Campuses are relatively quiet. Question for Jack to start with, then I'll open up to the panel, is as organizations are thinking about the return to campus in fall, what tips do you have around planning for planned events or unplanned protests, noting this recent experience? What should organizations be thinking about as the campus community comes back together in the fall?
So, Glenn, one of the first things I'd mention is I would expect everyone to be doing some tabletop drills or some discussion of potential scenarios, and again, making sure that everything's in place. What would we do if this were to happen? And also, one thing we've seen, Murphy's Law so often comes into play with when the individual who is designated to make that decision is out of town and an event happens. So, you know, even incorporating, make sure you have a good lines of succession of if this person is out of play, who's going to assume that responsibility, and doing some scenarios in that manner. One thing I think we need to make sure that we're not neglecting, and that's the safety of our officers and our personnel. You know, we're very concerned about the safety of our campus community, campus law enforcement in general, and as many of us, I've worked both municipal law enforcement and campus. We're very community oriented, we're very open, we're very friendly, we're very approachable. And that's the nature of campus law enforcement, about those relationships. At the same time, when you have these protests, you have these outside influences. You know, you had officers who had frozen water bottles thrown at them, officers who were spit on, and we've got to make sure that our officers have the necessary training and equipment. Although we're approachable, you know, if your institution doesn't have riot gear, again, it's not something you would use on a normal basis, but you need to have what's available to protect your officers. Breaching tools. You know, still a number of institutions who don't have breaching tools, who don't train with breaching tools. In the event you have facilities that's locked in, with individuals locked in, you may need to have those. So I think that ties into what Paul was talking about earlier on, with some of the work being done with the feds for some of this training. But I think that's critical, is the safety of our personnel, because again, I don't want to go into any specifics, but I know of some officers who were injured in these recent protests. Now, I think along the same lines, making sure you have something such as OmniGuard in place, that you're able to track them. It's very easy for an officer or one of your employees to get mixed into the crowd, and certainly bad things could happen. It's very chaotic, so we need to make sure you're focusing on the safety of your personnel.
Yeah. Also, if your students are gone now, this is a good time to tighten up your policies. So that's what we found out, that there were many holes in our posting policies and some of our other policies that they were able to squeeze through. And you know, these national organizations, as we've heard earlier, are very well organized, and they don't really care what happens on your campus. They just want to weaponize the students to get what they do to achieve their goal. So tighten up your policy, your posting policies. We had them projecting on the side of the library, and we didn't have that in our posting policy. They couldn't do it. We didn't have the tents in our policy, but we're now tightening up based on what we've seen, based on best practices from other institutions, all of our policies, so we can react rather than be reactive.
You're on mute, Rodney.
Tyrone, you brought up a point as well earlier that just speaking to the points the two of you just mentioned, what we're seeing now that's a little different. We have faculty, alumni, and parents getting involved with the protests themselves. And so as we examine policy, it's a good time to see if your existing policy addresses employees and addresses staff and faculty as well. And some of the new dynamics that Tyrone was just mentioning, and also the tie-in to those universities who have policies where outside groups have to have a student sponsor or student organization sponsor, making sure our policies hold accurately accountable those student organizations to ensure that they are not being used by these outside influencers.
You know, everybody had these great comments. The importance is to try to, and it's hard because I'm trying to do it now, is steer your campus to the fall and solutions for the fall instead of dealing with, you know, what happened in the spring and trying to, you know, find blame, and that there's a lot of that continues to happen. Some of it, you know, is probably what they want to have happen, but getting clear direction for the fall is vital for this right now. You know, most campuses 60+ days, and you know, people are going to be back. If these issues in Israel and in Palestine do not resolve themselves with a peace agreement by then, rest assured this is going to happen. If you're lucky enough and you're listening to this webinar and your community hasn't had one of these, your campus hasn't had one of these, don't sit there and think that, you know, we're good. Learn from us that have had that. Reach out to people. You know, at this year's IACLEA conference, I worked with the team at headquarters to refocus what the conference was going to be about. So we have refocused to specifically look at the issues that we're facing and come up with best practices that we can deploy and give to members and their institutions to help with the process. So now's the time to work. I know now's the time in a lot of places where people, you know, go everywhere, you know, but at their campus this year, July should be a busy month for everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And there's been a couple of comments in the Q&A that I'll just bring up now. One from Ken McLeod, and he was responding to your comments, Paul, that the UK is similar, and especially in that the campus authorities, you know, the executive need the training just as much, if not more so, than the police team. So as we're doing that preparation and we're thinking about updating policies and our own teams internally, maybe it's the opportunity to expand that relationship or expand the influence of the training. To Jack's point, tabletop exercises involving more than the full range of individuals who might be involved. I think there's an opportunity there to step outside. The other one was a mention from Kathy Branton, and she just wanted to mention that many schools still have summer classes taking place right now, so it's not necessarily a quiet time for some schools, and there might be fewer people around as well. So it's an additional challenge for some organizations as well. Just wanted to acknowledge that. So one aspect, especially of the US environment, is free speech, First Amendment rights. Can anyone give some perspective on how you're ensuring freedom of speech and ensuring that, as you say, Rodney, it's speech might not be great, but it is lawful. It's awful but lawful. How are you ensuring that people's First Amendment rights are being met whilst maintaining campus safety?
Well, I can tell you at the University of New Hampshire, it's a daily thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that campuses and campus public safety have been doing an amazing job. When I talk to people across the country and internationally on this, everybody is doing an amazing job. What's changed is the nature of what's going on. And that's the key. And the difficulties of your meeting time, place, and manner in the United States to the First Amendment. However, it's not anymore about time, place, and manner. It's about a cause. And they don't, I think it goes to, and I forgot who said this, it might have been Rodney, that you're either with me or against me. And boy, is that loud on campus right now. And it's not as much of where they're doing the speech, whether you're a public institution, a private institution. It's more about if one side has somebody speaking that is pro one thing, you have that other side. That other side is not just vocal. They are, it's downright warfare in their minds. And that seems to happen a lot when we have polarized elections, polarized political areas. There's no in the middle anymore. It's either this side or that side.
And Paul, to their point too, thank you. I think Paul just nailed it. So thanks. But one thing that I wanted to add to that is asking the question, or at least coming to a shared understanding, as Paul was saying, about now's the time to plan for the fall and position your university for the fall, is articulating and coming to a shared understanding of whose role is it to communicate what the ground rules are as it relates to First Amendment speech. Because I think what I've seen as problematic in some universities is they're expecting public safety to take actions and engage in behaviors that really is not our role. Public safety's role is to ensure safety and not educate people on the First Amendment. And so having a conversation with your university now on how do we address coming to a shared understanding with our faculty, staff, and students on where university officials stop and public safety starts, and not asking public safety to engage in behaviors that can easily be perceived as stifling First Amendment protections and expressions, is one of those things we should be planning for the fall.
And speech on campus has been an issue for quite a while now. That is a topic where there's different perspectives on it. Obviously, the First Amendment is clear, but there's different perspectives from the different elements on campus. Tyrone, how do you manage it, both with the members of the community, but I guess also your executive and leadership?
So we do have our open expression observers, and they're all part of the student life, and so they're out there engaging with the students. We want to be the next step after that. We don't want to be the first ones to engage students. we do engage them on things like, we need a trash can, we need this, we need that. All things we can't supply because we can't be part of the protest. So, you know, all of that costs money to the university. And so our student groups have the ability to pay for those kinds of things. If you're not a sanctioned student group and and we're going to allow you to protest on campus, you're on your own on those kinds of things. You don't have power, you don't have water, you don't have trash facilities, you have none of that. And so to Rodney's point, making sure that as a campus safety group, they understand that your role there is to make sure they're safe, not just from counter protesters, but from any other kind of situation that may arise there. And when you do that, I find that they're a lot more open to us. They send me emails when they see strange people with pictures to say this person's strange, do they belong there? And I think when you start to gain those kind of relationships, you get the kind of inroads to get the compliance we're looking for.
All right, so we're winding down the webinar here. We've got about 15 minutes left. We'll open up for some questions from the audience shortly. But the last formal question to the group here is, we touched on it before when we talked about preparation and building relationships with campus partners and public service agencies and other agencies who may be able to help. Does anyone have any specific examples of very strong relationships that you've depended on or leveraged in this particular circumstance? Maybe the top one or two that you've engaged with most heavily from outside of your organization, or maybe even with inside your organization, but other elements like, as you said, Tyrone, campus life, for example. Paul, from your perspective and also from the iClear perspective, what do you think might be the top one or two external, I guess, service providers or partners that you see being used?
Everything's about relationships. And if you're trying to have that relationship on the day of the protest, you have a problem. And so you need to build those, and they should, and what I think is one of the top things that campus public safety and law enforcement do is out in the community, nurturing and building those relationships. It's a core function of what we do. It's not necessarily a core function of every law enforcement agency outside the campus. Now, outside agencies, those of us with public institutions, big ones, UNH, where I'm at, is the flagship school for the state. We host a lot of events, and there is no way my police department is big enough to handle all of these events. We're a first in the nation state. We get all the presidential candidates and their surrogates coming through. And so you build those relationships and partnerships with other agencies, county agencies, local agencies, state agencies, all year round to support your events. And so when these come on your campus and they're happening, they've already been there. They understand your campus culture. We do just-in-time training with every event that we have with the officers from the outside. It's 1 or 2 slides just to go over. You're on the university campus. Here's what's important on our campus, and here's what we do every single day, and so that they understand when they're there. And so having those relationships early, making sure they're strong, and just don't think like, we're good with the state police. Well, if you haven't had coffee with the colonel, or you haven't had coffee with the commander, have that cup of coffee and make sure things are good.
And so, Tyrone, going from University of New Hampshire and its position within New Hampshire State, a large organization, your organization, relatively speaking, is smaller, right? How do you navigate the relationships with the external agencies?
I think Paul's comments are universal. We're a private college, we're a small private college, but it's still about leveraging those relationships with the FBI and with our local municipal law enforcement. Like he said, if you haven't had coffee with the colonel about the situation, I'm in just as much trouble as the University of New Hampshire is.
Right. Rodney, your perspective on other agencies and engagement?
Well, I agree, it's universal. One caveat that I would throw onto it is, and this is piggybacking off of what Jack said earlier in terms of making sure we don't forget our officers. I see from different institutions and hear from them, officers feel they're in a position of a no-win situation no matter what they do. They fear if they do something, they're going to be on the front of CNN. They either fear if they do something, the university's not going to support them. And they fear if I do get in there, I'm going to be assaulted. And there's all sorts of stuff there. Is that as we talk about resourcing our officers with the right equipment and the right training, that we also don't forget their mental and emotional health as well, because our officers are struggling on their place as it relates to this, and what does it mean for their careers, and what does it mean for their physical safety and their emotional safety.
Yeah, extremely important. It's a very difficult situation to be in. Jack, you have a particular focus on retention of team members across the industry and so on, and the support for the officers in the field. Do you have any perspective on that?
Absolutely. Certainly making sure they have those mental health resources, and statistically, it's been proven that the peer support groups are the most beneficial. Every institution has their employee assistance program. They have their counseling center that's available. But from my experiences, and again also from research, having a peer group, which normally happens at the state level or municipal level in larger areas, having a peer support group, I think, is essential to that, where they can talk to others about it, and check on each other.
Great. Thanks, Jack. Very concrete advice there. So what we'll do now is we'll just shift to a few questions that have come from the audience, and then we'll wrap up. So it was mentioned early on that there's a lot of coordination, or at least communication via social media. The propaganda goes out via social media, and then there's a lot of encrypted apps for coordination. And the question is, what social media have you found to be the best source of intelligence? And what are the best practices, or has anyone had any success in monitoring social media for intelligence? You want to give any guidance there?
I think the difficulty in monitoring social media today is, how do you get access to monitoring them? What we're finding is, when our detectives or somebody, likes the site, and Instagram seems to be the one that's prevalent where I am, they're instantly blocking you out there. And, we have 2 officers assigned to the State Fusion Center, and, they have to walk a fine line on, what is First Amendment protected speech. And so and they know that. This is not new to the to these protesters. Like we said earlier, there's a lot of influence from the outside. They get trained. At our protests, we have outside attorneys. They are watching what we do, and for the group. So it's an organized thing. You've got to try to stay within the First Amendment on these, unless there is some criminal element that is being said. Then you certainly can avail yourself of the Constitution and to get access to things. But they know what we can and can't do, and they're really good at exploiting it.
Yeah, I think we rely more upon members of the dean staff and our OEO team, who they're used to seeing on their different apps from things before the protest. So it's kind of like the camera. You put up the camera, and about 6 months, people forget it's actually there. It's that same situation. They can't start logging on at the time of the protest and expect people not to notice. So this is one of those things they've been on, and so they don't comment on any of it. They just kind of pull the snaps and send them out so we can see what's going on. But again, don't rely on what you see on social media. As Paul says, they're very smart. They're very, very smart, and they will put misleading things on social media and put the accurate things on their apps that are encrypted.
Okay. Another question is, are there any significant differences and therefore best practices for non-sworn campus public safety when dealing with these protest activities? Anyone have any perspectives there on the differences between having a sworn department and non-sworn, and how you deal with these activities?
One issue that I've seen is optic-wise, best practices. You really don't want to have, if you have a sworn department, the sworn department engaging in non-law enforcement activities. And there's a difference between having public safety personnel engaging in the adherence to and enforcement of university policy versus criminal law. And I think a major part of that would be making sure your university understands that distinction. I think Tyrone brought it up earlier, just saying when the police come in, the police are coming in. And this is what the police officers are going to do. Public safety, there's some things that you can work with your non-sworn on who are the actual people who take down banners that are affixed to buildings, who are the actual people who cover over or wash off chalkings and things of this nature, and working with your facilities people and other university resources to see and help them understand their role in that, so that when public safety is called in, they're doing public safety stuff.
Very important. Jack, you navigate between different types of environments and you see a lot of differences. But your perspective on sworn and non-sworn?
So one thing I'd like to add just to what Rodney just said is, we would even have student groups who would overpaint messages, things of that nature. Then it's not even the institution, some of the free expression areas, things of that nature. I think if you don't have your own sworn agency, then I think that relationship with that municipal agency, needless to say, is even that more important. And I also think it's important to know what resources that they have available and how that they're going to respond to such an incident. Also knowing who, we talk some of the activities that protesters engage in, with the sleeping dragons, things of that nature, where they chain themselves together, making sure an agency who has expertise in being able to separate those individuals, things of that nature. That's very important. I think and in some ways, if you are non-sworn, then it kind of certainly it removes some of that responsibility for you, but it also removes that control. So that's the trade-off, that's the balance, if you will. One thing about the relationships that we haven't talked about a lot, although we've talked a lot about administration, is we're all very versed in ICS, using instant command system, NIMS, what have you. I think it's important internally to make sure your crisis communication team, your emergency operations group, or whatever your institution calls them, has an understanding of the instant command system, understand how it's going to work, and understands their role separate from incident command. And I think also during those conversations with the external partners, you need to understand who is incident commander, who is in charge based on the specifics of the incident. We've talked a lot about other municipal or about other law enforcement agencies, but we've also got to make sure we've got those relationships with fire, EMS, what have you, as certain events may turn into something where we're going to need all those agencies.
Yeah. Thanks, Jack, and that great words of wisdom. And what we'll do now is we'll hand to the remaining members of the panel for any final words of wisdom you'd like to share with participants, and then also set things up for further discussions that may occur at the likes of the conference in June. So, Paul, from your perspective, any final words for the participants here?
Look at your agency through a different lens today. Look at what you need, and get to work. You have very little time before it comes back, and we're all on notice. It's not like in the spring when this all kicked off, and we're learning this in some ways as we're going. There's going to be an expectation that there's plenty of time that we have to make sure that things are, from the public safety standpoint, are done right moving into the fall. So get the work done.
Tyrone, over to you.
Was that for me?
For Tyrone.
Oh, okay.
Maybe the last bit, Rodney.
I think Paul nailed it. I mean, this is not going to go away anytime soon. So if you're not planning, I know if you're a member of IACLEA, we've got several groups that are on there that are talking about tabletops. They have tabletop plans for you. A lot of resources that are available. So definitely take advantage of those resources. Talk to your colleagues in different places, and I'm just gonna repeat what Paul said. Get to work.
Yeah. And thanks for mentioning that, Tyrone, about the groups and sharing information. There was a question about, does anyone have tabletop exercises around protests to share? So I'm very highly encourage the sharing around this particular topic. And Rodney, final words from you.
Yeah, I should have went in front of Tyrone. He said exactly what I was going to say. But I will say, obviously, for going to promote IACLEA, and what I found most beneficial for this situation and anything else related to policy or any anomaly that comes up in our day-to-day work is our IACLEA connections. Just get on there and just say, hey, I'm having this issue. Anybody have a policy experience with whatever? And the collective wisdom of all of us is what makes us stronger. And I found everyone is so willing to help one another that you put your question or inquiry out there and you get the feedback, and people are willing to share tabletops and willing to share unique experiences that they've had. And I highly recommend that.
Great reinforcement. Thanks, Rodney. And just like to thank everyone for their time and commitment and what you've presented here today. I think it's been really, really valuable for the community. As a next step, I'd just like to highlight there are, as Paul mentioned, there are sessions at the IACLEA conference this year on this particular topic. There's one in particular on Tuesday at 3 p.m. where there's an international and local panel talking about this topic and taking it to the next level. So I'd encourage everyone to look out for those and engage. As Paul and everyone mentioned, this issue is not going away. It's likely to be long running, and preparation is key. So at that point, I'd like to close the webinar and thank everyone for their participation and time, and hope everyone has a great summer, and hope to see you at the conference.
Take care, everyone.